So thank you to everyone to have this opportunity. For those who know me for previous stuff, I'm Mattia. I'm a postdoc researcher at Center for Futures and Sustainable Technologies at Italian Institute of Technology, and I'm a member of Carbon Group at Politecnico di Torino. Our research, Our research group is here report. It's a very small group, but we'll try to be very active in the field. There is the head of the group, Prof. Tagliaferro, and my fellow researchers, Mauro Giorcelli, Pravin Jagdal, and Massimo. Today, I'm trying to present you an overview of our work on the use of biochar and replacement for traditional carbon support for the production of catalysts, both for classical thermal catalysis and also for electrochemical ones. So, catalysts and carbon. This is a very ancient and interesting story. If you look around, there are two different kinds of support that are spreading in all industrial sectors. One is represented by inorganic stuff like zeolite, and the other one is represented by carbon. Why? The reason is simple, because carbon generally could be produced with high surface area, as you saw in the previous presentation. It's quite stable under several reaction conditions. It's handleable, recyclable, and could be tuned for improve the selectivity of the reactions. So in the literature, you can find a lot of different supports, from activated carbon, the traditional ones, to carbon replica. There are very interesting material, like, for example, you can produce a zeolite cover with organic precursor, and after that carbonize it. This is a carbon replica. And also there are plenty of nanostructure and nanomaterials such as CNTs, graphene, and so on. All these materials must be tailored for the production of the catalyst with inorganic species, the active sites, just to be clear. There are two main different approaches to produce these materials. One is the wet approach. You just prepare a solution with the metal precursor of your catalyst and produce a nanostructured and microstructured material by using a surfactant. The other one are the deposition. Here I reported the metal vapor deposition, but there are also the chemical one, or more advanced, like the plasma sputtering stuff. These techniques are used to produce metal-supported catalysts onto different kind of carbons. So, biochar. Generally, so if you have in mind the previous presentation, you can object that low surface area is not be a thing, but trust me, for activated carbon using for catalyst support, the surface area of pristine biochar is quite low. Anyway, biochar meets all the parameters of classical carbon materials used for supporting metal sites for catalyst production. Of course, it should be tailored, but the stuff that you saw before, well, they've been studied a lot in the literature. So we came out with something different. We try to combine biochar with an organic species by using carbothermal reduction. Carbothermal reduction is also described in literature, but mainly for the production of material like SiC by mixing silicon oxide and graphite. So what we've done, we start like a wet template approach by mixing an inorganic salt with our biochar in a slightly acidic solution. We produce a salt-impregnated biochar, and after that we start to reheat it in the same condition of the original production of biochar. In this way, we anchored metal sites on the surface of biochar. I'm going more in detail on this technique in the next slides. So, this is the scheme of the overall reaction. You have the starting biochar with the channeled surface. After that, you have the deposition of the salts that partially cover all the porosity. And after that, also, you have the real activation process of biochar with the formation of active sites of the catalyst, the real carbothermal reaction. It is schematized on the down corner on the right. So basically, carbonaceous matrix of biochar act as reducing agent for metallic materials, producing a metal core particles covered by oxide, that are formed due to the air oxidation mainly. So let's start with some examples. We'll start this study by using oilseed rape. This material is quite interesting, but you can see it's a very common type biochar with a channeled surface, a surface area around 40 square meters per gram. It is produced at 700 degrees. But after the first step, after covering with the metal salts, we obtain this material, a material fully covered with a mixture of iron oxides in this case. And after the reheat process at 800 degrees, we saw this carbon material, a biochar-based material with a lot of iron particles anchored to the surface. Particles in the range from 100 nanometers up to 150 nanometers. And this is very interesting because these materials could be used for plenty of catalytic applications, you can see in the next part of the presentation. And also, we observe a very increment in the surface area, but this was expected because carbothermal reduction increased also surface area. But if for the production of common activated char, chemical activation, like for the case of zinc chloride, is detrimental for the overall sustainability, in this case, the addition of the metal is a key part for the production of the catalyst. So it's a strong part of the process and improve the overall sustainability for the catalyst production. The support for the overall process, for the description of the process, could be found by analyzing the Raman spectra herein reported. After the deposition of salt on the surface of biochar, we observe a mixture of iron oxide. After the real carbothermal reduction, we observe a great amount of fluorescence due to the metal core of the particles. And this is a support of the mechanism that I showed you in the previous slides. So, after metals that you can find a lot of procedures around to produce this kind of catalyst, we start to think to different approaches to different materials. So, if we can use the same approach of activation but leaving the materials on the biochar surface, what can we also do? Well, we can produce a basic catalyst by simply mixing sodium hydroxide or sodium carbonate. They are working pretty well both for the production of this material. This material is the same oilseed rape derived biochar, but covered with needles of sodium carbonate. This is very interesting because basic catalysts could be used in very appealing processes like the production of butanol or the Gerbert reaction for the production of sustainable alcohols. So we also try to simplify the overall process and try to pyrolyze the biochar or a feedstock directly mixed with salt in pyrolytic conditions. We did this by using a model feedstock, cellulose nanocrystals, aka CNCs. As you can see on the left, when they are isolated in the solution, they are needle-like structure, but in the bulky solution, they are like spheres. This shape is generally retained after pyrolysis, as you can see on the right. Well, if you mix CNCs with the basic salt, like sodium hydroxide, in water and pyrolyze the overall slurry at 800 degrees, this is what you obtain. It is a very, very interesting structure with a very high surface area in the range of 400 square meters per gram, with a fractal structure made by collapsed spheres that is resembling the figure here, with hexagonal particles of sodium carbonate tightly bounded on the surface. And this is very, very promising for all the applications that require a high surface area and a basic catalyst that is slightly less studied than acidic ones like zeolites, let's say in this way. So the applications. The first one that we studied recently, just last year, with iron-decorated biochar produced through carbothermal synthesis, was the catalytic oxidative desulfurization of oil-derived pyrolytic oil produced by conversion of waste tires. So we pyrolyzed tires at 500 degrees, we recovered the oil, and we saw that the sulfur concentration was very, very high, up to 7,000 ppm. Generally, for drop-in fuel, the concentration already is around 10. So we have carbon, we have iron, we have a process, we test the process. Just to be clear, we test not only a catalyst produced by using the carbothermal process using biochar as support, but also the carbon black recovered from pyrolysis of tires. And we achieved good results. We achieved the sulfurization up to 70%. So quite interesting. More interesting was the different effect of those two materials. While the carbon black recovery from tire after decoration with iron worked quite well, but not so much, the iron decorated coffee biochar was very, very promising. And this was due to a morphological feature. While generally carbon black or activated carbon used for the production of supported catalyst has a fine structure made with particles on nanometric scales, the microstructured biochar could be a more efficient support with more exposed particles, particles that are not covered by carbon particles. Moreover, in the case of iron-decorated biochar, we observe particles that, okay, they have a core of iron, metallic iron, and cover with iron oxide, but they have also a very thin layer of iron carbide that follow the anchoring process to the carbon matrix. And these allow to recycle them without loss any activity after 3 cycles. So we hypothesize a thing like that. So tightly anchored particles, a little bit of damaging of the surface, but the particles remain tightly anchored to biochar. And this is a very, very interesting thing for heterogeneous catalysis in a very harsh environment like the oxidative desulfurization condition. So, but we haven't not only worked on carbothermal reduction, we also developed other methodologies for functionalized biochar for the production of catalysts. In the next slides, you are going to see what we've done for the production of electrochemical catalysts. The first thing that we studied with the Green Energy Group of Ploitecnico of Torino was the production of a catalyst for the oxygen reduction reaction, ORR, for the realization of fuel cells. So in this case, we need not only a high surface area biochar, but also a very conductive one. So we perform an annealing process at 1500s. And after that, we functionalize heat with iron, with an iron compound, the phthalocyanine that you can see here, through an interesting innovative approach by using ball milling. So we use mechanochemistry to the production of the catalyst. We also modify the original surface by using 2 different approaches. So by using carbon dioxide flow to increase the specific surface area, and also we used urea as addition during the annealing process for induced and nitrogen doping on the surface. The material that we recovered, that you can see on the right, was quite different from the channeled one that we start with, but it worked very well, as you can see in the next slides. Here, we analyzed, I report the XPS analysis of both the materials after the ball milling, the pyro T, so the original T after the insertion of iron sites, the CO2 activated one in the center, and urea treated one. Here, the most interesting thing is, one, the amount of iron 2, the real catalytic sites that increase after the modification of the substrate, biochar substrate, by using carbon dioxide or urea. In the case of urea, the spectra of iron 2, that here is not reported, is practically the only one that you can observe. And we suppose that was due to the greatest amount of pyridinic nitrogen materials, as you can see from the XPS hearing reported. This nitrogen stabilizes iron 2. Iron 2 is the key of this kind of catalysis. Here they are reported the staircase cyclic voltammetry curves, and as you can see, the urea treated and the CO2 treated material and urea treated one were quite better than just metal supported material. Moreover, this is the most interesting thing, urea C is the best if you test it for the methanol tolerance. So in a real fuel cell, this material, the urea treated iron T, is practically better than a common platinum supported on carbon. And this is the key of the study, urea T, urea treated T biochar and CO2 treated biochar did not show any decrease of activity after 4,500 cycles of discharge, compared with platinum that show a loss of 40%. It's quite promising. So moving on, we also test biochar supported metal particles for a different kind of catalytic systems. We test it for the electrochemical reduction of CO2. In this study, we start with the modification of biochar by decorating the surface of coffee-derived biochar using bismuth nitrate. After an annealing at 400 degrees to complete oxidize the surface, we obtain the material that you can see on the right in this slide. And we test them in a flow cell that you can see on the left. Preliminary analysis showed a practically homogeneous cover with bismuth all over the carbonaceous material, with the slightly formation of a small amount of bismuth, but this is expected because even if the temperature is far lower than a common carbothermal process, here bismuth, well, let's see, is easily to reduce compared to iron. Anyhow, electrochemical outputs of these catalysts were very, very interesting. As you can see, the Faradic efficiency for the catalytic conversion of CO2 to formic acid is very, very high. Chronoamperometric spectra that you can see on the right, the E spectra labeled here, is practically constant after 5 hours. The current density increased practically linearly with different voltage, and it's constant also. And it's, as you can see, quite high plotted against the potential. And the production rate increase, of course, with the potential applied in the flow cell, up to 60 milligrams per centimeter square on hour. So, and I came to the end. What I'd like to point it out with this small presentation is that biochar could be a solid replacement for traditional carbon sources for the production of catalysts, but could also exploit a new and different kind of activity. The microstructured materials like biochar are very, very promising for the anchoring process of nanoparticles, because they are not undergoing to the activation for the deposition of carbon on the metal species. Also, all the electrochemical process that are requiring a catalyst could be also performed by using biochar. And this is a very promising, I know that I said it a lot of times, but it's true, new approach for all those processes that are aiming for an increased sustainability. So finish, and if you have any question, I'm ready to answer to them.
Thank you, Mattia, for your presentation. Really interesting, and always interesting to hear the catalytic stuff. If anyone has any questions, please write in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask directly. And as always, I try the first question. So, what do you see as a possible disadvantage of using biochar in catalytic applications? Is there anything that might become a problem?
The main thing, well, this is just an opinion, is when you are talking with someone that is producing support and general catalyst for industrial application on a large scale, the first thing that you should be faced is the tradition. If you prepare a thing every time in the same way by using the same char, you have the same approach for all the stuff. So proposing a new material is not easy, because if you are going to a company that is producing catalyst supported on carbon and say, okay, but biochar is better because it's microstructured, it's more sustainable, they say, okay, but why I should change the process? This is the main problem. Just try to promote it on the real field application. The other one is the production, because when we are talking about the production of catalyst, we are talking about tons for each process, tons of catalyst for fill the plants. And the production on tons of biochar is not so easy. And you should grant that is the same every single time, with the same functional groups, with the same residues, with the same amount of ashes. So the standardization of biochar is a key point for the production of trustworthy support and for gain some trust from all catalytic producers. These are my opinion about.
Great. So probably you should start your own catalytic production company. Gabriel raised his hand to ask a question.
Yes, thanks for your nice talk. I was wondering, similar in the same lane as Christian's question, from a very, so obviously the selling point you have for biochar is it's green and to some degree sustainable and so on, and you have those the microstructures, which I guess you would also have with some other engineered carbon materials. So on a very kind of salesman level, do you think that biochar-based catalysis has a chance? Because I would guess that from a quantitative point of view, you probably don't need very huge amounts. So would it be competitive with other materials?
For electrochemistry, yes, because for electrochemistry, there is space for that. For thermal catalytic conversion is a little bit tricky, because I've been involved recently in a project based on the development of catalysts for CO2 conversions. It is a process. It is a project with high TRL that required the production of around 50 tons of products each year. It means that we should provide up to 4 or 5 tons of catalysts. It means a lot, because 5 tons of material standardized, it's a very huge amount. So you should face these processes. And also there is space for biochar. So if you have a big production of biochar, standardized one, you can sell the point that, okay, I can try this, because it's an endless marketplace. Everyone that is producing these materials is just finding for other materials. There is space to put your material there. For merely applications, what I can say is that microstructure could be the winning point of biochar, because yes, you can produce microstructured materials by engineering stuff, but it's not easy. When you use carbon replica, you can produce whatever you want, but you should remove silica, you should in a very early stage, you should prepare the silica. After that, you should remove it. After that, you should wash it. After that, you should grind it. With biochar, it's far easier. You can just put
Yeah,
your
the price.
biomass.
I think the pricing would also probably be a big argument, right?
Yes, in these cases, yes. There are also some processes that could be just hot iron during the conversion, iron, zinc, or also in some cases, small cases, some nickel for increase the crystallinity, and the material that come out from the reactors is just electronic materials for fuel cells or catalyst for oxidation. So there is space, but as I told you to Chris, as I told to Christian, you should convince the players that biochar supported catalysts are equal or better. If you have proofs, you should convince them, and it's not easy because it's a very traditional field. Even if it's full of innovation as you wish, but it's a very traditional one, and they're very slow to change.
Great, thank you, Mattia. And you got two more questions. One from Mitchell about do you have any work specific to hydrogen extraction from woody pyrolysis syngas? Did you work on that? Hydrogen?
Not since 2015. I did something. It's possible to do that. We try to figure out a process, a very experimental one, based on microwave pyrolysis with an external supported catalyst for conversion in gas phase by using a partial of heat of the vapors for advanced cracking. We tried also to mix it with plastics and try to improve the hydrogen production by recycling the gas. We tried. We didn't get some good results. This is what I can say, but it was a long time ago and we just make some try.
And another question from Paula. How easy or difficult is it to recover and reuse biochar-based catalysts?
Not particularly. As all the other carbon materials, a little bit better, if I should say, because the micrometric particles are far easier to recover than nanometric ones. If you are working with active carbon on the micrometric scale, like a carbon black, it's a nightmare to recover the carbon after the catalysis test. By using biochar is far easier. You can just use a filtration in lab scale or a magnet. On a large scale, you can just pelletize it and put into the reactor, or you can just use also some filtration process also in large scale application, but it's not so hard.
And the second question from Paula was, what are the main parameters to keep in mind when selecting a biomass feedstock to produce biochar?
Availability, every time availability and morphology, because you can also think to use the original morphology of biomasses to producing things. We can produce fibers for the electrodes by using hemp, by using waste cotton. We can use spongy stuff like coffee residues for producing catalysts for heterogeneous catalysis. We can change the morphology of waste stream of cellulose by adding metals. So availability as first step, and the second one is the morphology, keeping in mind the final application that you are aiming.
And what's about ash content? I guess that's something you want to avoid usually, or? No,
because generally you can just ignore it. It's not the problem. The only problem it comes when you are starting to use rice husk, because in that case the amount of ash is around 40%. So you don't have a real carbon support. You have a mixture of inorganic and organic one. So in that case, it's a little bit a mess. But otherwise, when you have an ash content around 1%, 2% is not a problem.
Okay, great.